This video is all about active transport. Now, one of the major things to remember about active transport is that it is when molecules travel from an area of low concentration to high concentration. And because this isn't really natural, it costs the cell energy to make it happen. So, for example, if this molecule wanted to travel into the cell, so if this green molecule wanted to travel into the cell, it would have to travel from an area of low concentration up here, outside the cell, to an area of high concentration inside the cell. So in order to do that, it's just going to cost energy in the form of ATP, most likely. Let's look at one of the major examples of active transport. One of the major examples, and really the only example I talk about much, is called the sodium-potassium pump. The inside of our cell actually has a really high concentration of potassium, which I've made orange in this case, and it has a low concentration of sodium, which I've made purple. And this is the inside of our cell. The outside of the cell is exactly the opposite. It has a high concentration of sodium and a low concentration of potassium. So what the sodium-potassium pump does is it actually creates this high sodium outside the cell and this high potassium inside the cell. So what's happening is the sodium-potassium pump is actually pumping potassium from low to high, from outside the cell to in, and it's pumping sodium from low to high, from inside the cell to out. And actually it does this in a way to where it creates a positive environment outside the cell and a negative environment inside the cell. But really what's important here is that in order for this pump to work, the sodium-potassium pump, it is requiring ATP, and that sodium and potassium are both going from low to high. So that is definitely the most important note to make. Next, let's look and see how large materials get in and out of the cell. Bulk transport is what we refer to as moving large molecules in and out of the cell. So think large molecules are going to require ATP to get in, and they're actually also moving from low to high. So there are two different types of active bulk transport. You're going to have something where you have molecules you're trying to get into the cell. So the cell membrane kind of dips down here and it forms a vesicle, which is actually made of a phospholipid bilayer, just like the cell membrane, because it is the cell membrane. It came from it, and it is bringing those little purple dots into the cell, and that is called endocytosis because it brings things into the cell. And sometimes the cell needs to release things into the ECM, which is the extracellular matrix. So maybe after the endomembrane system creates a protein, it goes from the Ruffyar to the Golgi, and it's traveling in its vesicle, and it travels out of the cell. So you guys actually, when you made that video, showed this process of a vesicle kind of coming up to the membrane and releasing the contents out into the environment. And this is called exocytosis because it's making things leave the cell or exit the cell. And that's honestly all you really need to know about active transport. What all these have in common, endocytosis, exocytosis, and sodium-potassium, is that it's molecules moving from low to high and that it requires energy.